Right. Patty Quinzi. And you'll be followed by Kate Greer. Hi there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. My name is Patty Quinzi, and I'm the Legislative Counsel for the Texas chapter of the American Federation of Teachers. We are very enthusiastic about the infusion of $6.3 billion into our public schools over the next biennium, and we very much support the chairman's efforts to update the school finance formulas. We are very glad to see that high-quality full-day pre-K is included, because we know very well that that's a critical foundation for student learning. However, we are deeply concerned about the role of educators in HB 3, as the primary pay provisions are performance-based. While AFT supports increasing the minimum salary schedule, the vast majority of educators would not benefit. And also, Texas teachers are already $7,000 below the national average for teacher salaries. So we would request that the legislature remove the merit pay provisions and direct some of the additional revenues flowing through the formulas as funding for raises for all public education employees. HB 3 leaves numerous questions about how to operate the teacher performance system and how specifically teachers would be measured. Part of our opposition to the merit pay system is a potential over-reliance on the STAR test, an exam that has not been determined to be valid and reliable for determining a teacher's true influence on a student. While Texas AFT would prefer to strike the merit pay provision altogether, educators would prefer would be far more comfortable if we had some kind of a provision in HB 3 that included a safeguard to specifically forbid the use of STAR tests in compensation decisions. And while the STAR is not specifically mentioned in the bill, it's the most obvious mechanism to use that the state could use to compare educators on a statewide basis. And an example of where we see the overuse of this STAR test is in the teacher designation system section that refers to the growth of students' performance over multiple years. To us, that signals the use of very controversial value-added methodology, which is very difficult for teachers to understand why one educator might get a stipend and another doesn't. Again, the merit-based pay scales also allow too much overuse of the STAR test. This requires districts to set up performance tiers. And again, we wonder how would a district be able to do that to compare educator to educator without using standardized testing. And I also want to point out that school districts have hewed to schedules based on years of experience and sometimes even educational levels, as long as teachers maintain their minimum years in their salary schedule. However, the schedule here in HB 3 would not include or not be required to include factors based on experience. So what that signals to us is that maybe hard work and experience don't matter as much, and that's kind of troubling. It also includes student perception surveys for grades 3 and above. And these surveys lack objectivity and are not based on observable job-related criteria, which is required in Section 21.351 of the Texas Education Code. And evidence shows and research shows that students are more likely to hold their teachers in high regard in the elementary levels versus high school. We also see research that shows that women and minority teachers tend to be rated lower than white and male teachers. And additionally, this type of evaluation would be very different in a small town where folks know their teachers very intimately, see them at church, in the grocery store, whereas in a large urban district, you would have some probably different results. And lastly, we are very concerned with the tremendous amount of new authority granted to the unelected Commissioner of Education. And that concludes my comments. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. We look forward to continuing to work on this.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much. Thanks. Members, any questions? Chairman King.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand your concerns. One thing I would like to address, the bill specifically doesn't mention the STAR test because the plan is to allow each district to submit their own criteria for the teacher. Now, if your school board and your school district chooses to use the STAR test as part of their plan, that's a local decision. The state is saying, we don't want you to. We absolutely don't want you to. The thought is to allow a district to submit a plan, a lot like we did District of Innovation.
Right.
You submit a plan generated at the local level, because what's accountability and what is growth, rather, in Canadian Texas, where I live, may not be the same as it is in Houston. Right. So we want school districts. This is largely about local control, and that was something that we insisted on when we got the recommendations out. Is there's not a one-size-fits-all, and I can tell you right now, just from legislative intent, the intent to leave it vague like that was to give back local control and not allow the Commissioner of Education to determine who gets the stipend based on the STAR testing. I hope that makes sense.
It does. It does. And I guess along those reasonings, that's why we would feel more comfortable if there was a state-level prohibition against the use of the STAR test.
And I have no problem with putting that in there.
Great, thank
This
you.
is about local. This to me is about local control and sustainability, and recruitment and retention of our best teachers in our most underserved areas. How we get there, we can skin that cat a lot of ways. I don't want the STAR test to be part of this, and I want it to be sustainable, and that's why we're putting it in statute.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate
Yes,
that.
ma'am.
Representative Salarico.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to clarify, your concern is purely with STAR being used as part of the evaluation system. You don't have a problem with an evaluation system that's tied to compensation that's based on classroom observation or some kind of community feedback, whether student or parent?
No, but I think it's important to realize that we need reasonable pay before we can talk about merit pay. And teachers very much feel, teachers are, you've heard from them, in the past couple of weeks, that teachers are facing healthcare costs that they never thought, would cut into their ability to pay for their rent or their food. So, teachers are really overwhelmed, but not just teachers, all school employees are really feeling the burn from lack of raises and increasing healthcare costs.
Okay, but a merit pay.
No, in fact, we have local, some of our locals, such as Austin ISD, has created these locally developed systems with a lot of teacher buy-in, and they have worked well.
And so an AFT is not opposed to this?
No, sir.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chairman Hubert.
Yeah, just maybe comments. I don't think these are questions. We had your group in along with the other teacher groups yesterday to talk about this, and we're trying to figure out kind of where do we land on it. And we had heard from the teacher groups and groups that were out there about the third grading allotment, and we didn't even have the bill written, and you guys came in and basically told me you hated it. And so what we did is we pulled it out and took the $400 million and took that out too. And so what I would encourage you to do, because we're just not going to take this and go stick it into the bill, we'll just take it out and we'll use it, it'll go someplace else. So you have an opportunity now to be able to be collaborative, work together. And we had everybody in the office, and I think they're going to be able to try to do that. I've read some of the things that your leadership has said about the legislature in particular. We haven't responded the same way. We're trying to be helpful. In fact, this House and this committee has been very beneficial. So I'm a little disappointed you're just on the bill, and I'll tell you why. Because last session I went actually and looked it back up, and I think last legislative session with the $1.8 billion that we put into the system, that you were for the bill at that particular time. And now we're putting $6.3 billion into the system, and you're not for it. So I would encourage you to make sure that as we continue to proceed and work collaboratively together, that's very important to us. In addition, I think I talked about this, but I want to be very clear so you understand this. We recognize that it's critical that we take care of our teachers, but treat them as professionals as we go along. I've got a lot of teacher friends that are in the system as well. So when we talk about we're going to deal with how do we come together with where we want to be. But we're taking it from the different perspective, which is that we have to deal with the active care, we have to deal with the pension program, we have to deal with it. But there's only a certain amount of money that's available in the system today. And so as we continue to work and be collaborative together, it just, obviously we do everything we can. I find it alarming to me that last session 1.8, you guys were for it. And I was the one that fought against many things that you didn't like that were very, very bad, and my committee members that did that. And this session, you're not for spending $6.3 billion for our children. And I guess the question is, when we think about this as we go forward, the majority of money that's spent in schools is spent where? Where do you think it's spent?
On instruction.
Instruction.
Teacher
On teachers. And so the question becomes, you heard superintendents are going to be able to make their own flexible decisions, which is what our plan is. The teachers don't work for me. They don't work for this committee, and they don't work for the legislature. They work for the independent school district that is has elected board members as we go. So let's continue to work together and come up with some ideas and compromises. I'd just be just encourage you to and we will do this, and I've told my members this, is that we're going to be polite and courteous as we go forward through this process to try to make sure that we don't lose tempers and things of that nature, and it's helpful to make sure that your leadership treats us with the same courtesy and level of respect as we go forward. I think we would all appreciate that as we continue to work on your behalf, because we are fighting really hard
I realize that, sir.
to help you guys and to help the children. And ultimately, you know, we're focusing on 5.4 million children, recognizing 100% that the professional teachers and counselors and librarians and everybody else that's part of this system is going to benefit from any of these changes that we do. And the other thing, the other people we got to think about here is the taxpayers, because we got taxpayers that are getting taxed out of their homes, and we've got to reform that system as part of it. And the governor's made that very important, so is the speaker. And so there's some other things as we go along I think are going to be important. So we're going to try and balance as best we can.
Thank you. And if I may, Mr. Chairman, I just want to clarify that we are very grateful for the $6.3 billion. It is but for the merit pay element in this bill that we would be for it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you
Appreciate
very
that.
much.
Okay, members, any other questions? All right.